Welcome to the online lectures for software engineering. In today's class, we'll be learning the topic risk management. Now, what is risk management? Risk. Now, within the previous chapter, we have studied that whenever you're designing a particular project, you also identify the different risks. Now, what is that risk? Now, risk is an undesired event or circumstances that occur while a project is underway. That is, when you're developing a particular project, there might be some situations that you have to deal with, that some consequences might arise. Now it becomes very necessary for the project manager to anticipate and identify the different risks that the project might be susceptible to. So when you identify the risk, will be easy for you to eliminate those risks. Now the definition for risk management goes as: it aims at reducing the impact of all kinds of risk. Now, there are different types of risk. Now, this risk management is going to reduce all the impact of these risks that is going to affect your project by identifying, analyzing, and managing them. That is the first step is you're going to identify. Then you're going to see what is actually affecting the risk. How is it affecting? What are the different assets that are being compromised? What are the different components? Then how you're going to remove those risks. That is going to be the three steps within the risk management. Now, the two types of risk, reactive risk and proactive risk. Now, this proactive risk, this proactive risk means that this risk management, it is going to deal with what is going to happen, what happens before a risk becomes a threat. So this deals with the before part. Whereas the another risk, that is reactive risk. Now this reactive risk management is what happens after a risk becomes a threat. So there are two things, that is what is going to happen before the risk becomes a threat, that becomes proactive. Whereas what is going to happen after that risk has become, that is called as your reactive risk. These are the two types of risk: proactive, before what happens before a risk becomes a threat, and reactive risk, that means what is going to happen after a risk has become a threat. So this reactive risk, it is going to depend upon all the different past analysis and responses, as you need to know what happens after the risk. Whereas this proactive risk, combines the methods of past and present, future prediction. All the findings are there within your proactive risk. Now, coming on to software risks. Now, there are two characteristics within the software risks. There is uncertainty and loss. Now, what does uncertainty means? Uncertainty means that risk may or may not happen. That is uncertainty. Whereas what is loss? Loss means that there is some consequences that might occur. Unwanted loss, you can say this as unwanted loss, or also the consequences of the specific risk. Now, this includes software risks are of six types. The first one is your project risk. Now, project risk, it means that this might affect your schedule and the cost of the project. That is your project risk, the schedule or cost can be affected. Whereas the next is your technical risk. Now, this technical risk means technicalities can be affected, like your quality of the risk or the time in which you're going to complete your complete your project. Then you've got the business risk. Now, business risk means the viability of a project can be affected. That is the how you're developing the project, the development can be affected. Then the next risk is your known risk. Now, known risks are the risk from which you can recover, risks that can be recovered. Now, this recovery is not easily done. This recovery is done by careful evaluation of different criterias. Then you have the unpredictable and predictable risk. Now, this unpredictable risk means risks that can occur and they are very difficult to identify. Whereas the next one, that is a predictable risks are the risks that can be easily identified. This can be identified. Now, how these can be identified? By studying your past project, that is from this experience of past projects. So these are the software risks. Now, this first topic is risk identification. Now, risk identification, as the name suggests, that risk identification is going to identify the different types of risk that might occur. So, there are few steps in here. Now, risk identification is you're going to identify all the possible risks that are going to occur or that might occur. That is from the past experience or from studying your project. This is the risk that might occur. This is the consequences that we might face as we're using a new technology or a new security patch is being used. So based upon that, you identify the different possible risks that might affect your project. Then create item checklist. Now, when you know the different risks, you're going to also make all the list of all the risks. Then the next step is categorize into risk components: performance risk, cost risk, support risk, and schedule risk. Now here you've got a number of risks you're going to get. Now these number of risks, they need to be categorized into different groups. That is, if there's performance risk, that risk need to come on below this. Then cost risk, they need to come below here. So these are all the groups in which you're going to categorize these risks into. Then divide the risk into one of the four categories. That is a negligible risk, that is, that might not give huge amounts of loss. If you even ignore that type of risk, that will be fine. Then marginal one, that is, that might affect some aspects of the project. Then you've got critical 2 and catastrophic 3 risks. Now that is, that are going to affect major parts of the project or the entire software. Then within risk identification includes a few steps. That is, it is going to focus on the product size, the how it is going to impact your business, in what environments the project is being developed, what is the definition of the process, how the customer characterizes the different softwares, and based upon what different technologies you're building the software, whether those are the newly used technologies, and how many people are assigned to complete the project. That is your staff size and experiences. Then we have risk projection. Now, this risk projection, this is also called as risk estimation. Now, estimation can be done by making use of different risk table. Now, what estimation is done here? It is going to estimate what is going to be the impact of risk. on a particular project. Now, now within risk identification, you are identifying that so and so risks might occur. Now, this the main part is that if suppose a risk becomes a threat, how it is going to affect your project, how much loss a company might incur, or how much loss a particular project might incur. So, based upon this, you're going to estimate your losses. Now, risk projection addresses risk in two ways. There is likelihood and there is consequences. Now, risk is basically identified by consequences into likelihood. Like there's a formula of risk that is Li into Xi. That is your risk formula. Now, what is likelihood? Likelihood is the probability that the risk is real. That is the probability of the occurrence of that particular risk is your likelihood. The worst effect is your likelihood. Then consequences, how what is going to happen when this risk becomes the threat. How much losses can be incurred, or how much money needs to be put in to avoid that risk. Then the next is within risk prediction, there are few steps involved. Estimate the likelihood of that risk. That is, what is the worst effect that this risk can have. Then estimate the consequences. Now, as risk is likelihood into consequences, you need to have an estimate of both of them. Then you're going to estimate the impact of the risk, how much it is going to affect, what different assets it can affect, how much information can be compromised, what effect it is going to have upon the name of the company. Then you need to make a risk table. Then ignore the risk where the management concern is low. That means risk having impact high or low with low probability of occurrences. That is you're going to ignore those risks. Then consider all risks where management concern is high or low impact with high. Now this means that high impact with high or moderate probability of occurrence of that risk. You're going to consider all risks where management concern is high. That is where assets that might have high value. Now, what asset are? It can be any valuable information. It can be either an idea, it can be a software, anything that is your asset that has got high value that might affect your company. So, where the company concern is high, you're going to focus upon those risks. Now, this is your risk table. You're going to have different risks. What are the categories of the risk? How much probability of the risk becoming the threat, and what are the impact? And you've got the RMM plan. The next, we're going to study RMM only. So this is going to be your risk table. Now, next is risk refinement. Now, this risk refinement is also called as risk assessment. Now, this risk refinement refines the risk table in reviewing the risk impact based upon three factors. That is, you're going to assess the risk, you're refining the risks that you've identified into three ways: nature, scope, and timing. Now, what is nature? The problem if risk occurs, likely problems that might arise. That is, what is the nature of that risk, how harmful that is. Then, scope, how serious it is. That is, how much, what is the likelihood of that risk to occur. Then timing, what at what time this risk might occur. Now, time does not mean the exact hour and the minute. That is, at what particular scenario this might occur. When at that, if suppose an attack is being launched, whether that attack is going to take a long time. That is all, your servers might be jammed, or it is going to be a less time of attack. That is going to be estimated. Now, this risk sign refinement, it is based upon the elaboration. Now, this is, you're going to calculate the risk exposure. That is going to be the probability and the cost of your risk. You're going to elaborate the risk. Now, this risk elaboration, risk identification, I think this is a very long process, so and very critical process, so it requires computation of your risks based upon different formulas. The next is your risk mitigation, monitoring, and management. Now, the goal of RMM is to assist the project team in developing a strategy for dealing with the risk. Thus, that is, you've first identified what are risks. You've identified the risks. You have assessed the risk. Assessment is done. You've done the refinement and elaboration. Now you need a team that is going to help you to deal with those risks. How you're going to deal with that risk? You require a team. Now there are three issues within the RMM, that is risk avoidance. You can either avoid that particular risk, that is you're going to leave it if suppose it has got less impact. This risk has got less impact, or it is you're going to have less loss. You can avoid that particular risk, that is you're not going to focus upon that risk. Then risk monitoring, that's going to monitor the risk, how much impact it is going to have, how harmful that particular risk is. Based upon that, you can implement controls, that is how you're going to avoid that risk then to occur. Then risk management, how you're going to manage those risks if suppose that risk is if suppose that risk occurs, if suppose there's particular risk that the controls might not be able to completely nullify that risk. So how you're going to manage those controls, that is going to be identified, or how you're going to recover from those risks, that will be identified. So the three issues in the RMM. So the next is risk mitigation. Within risk mitigation is you're going to go for proactive planning for risk avoidance. That is how you're going to avoid that risk within the first place. Now risk avoidance is just the best strategy, because it is better be safe than sorry. Then risk monitoring, you're going to assess whether predicted risk occurs or not. That is when you've predicted a risk might occur, whether it is going to occur or not. You're going to monitor each and every thing based upon the all the assessment that you've done within identification after the identification phase. Then within risk management, you're going to go for contingency planning, where actions need to be taken, where what action need to be taken when the particular risk is active, or if suppose your mitigation plans fail, then what you're going to do. And you're also going to focus upon device RMMP, that is risk mitigation, monitoring, and management plan. This is in detail. You're going to identify what happens when the risk is going to take place, how you're going to control that, how you're going to recover from that. This whole plan needs to be made. Then the last is the RMM plan. Now, this RMM plan, it documents all work performed as a part of risk analysis. Now, you've done the identification is there, assessment, refinement, elaboration, likelihood, consequences. Now, based upon this, everything needs to be documented. Now, why these things need to be documented? Because of some similar risk might occur. Now, based upon that similar risk, you can identify what was the impact, what was done to reduce the impact of the risk, how you've controlled that particular risk. That is why you need to document the risk. And these documentation is also done if suppose there is some different organizations need to identify how you're safeguarding your assets, so you can also give this documentation to help others to mitigate those particular threats and vulnerabilities. Now each and every risk is documented individually, that is if within you've got cost risk is there, performance risks are there, different types of risk are there. So each different type of risk is documented separately. You're not going to put all things together and make a clutter. You're going to document each and everything in a sequential form. So this is the end of today's class and the end of this unit, third unit.